So this is our case. Let's start over here. What's the case? You are a network administrator, right? Or you work with services, network services that are connected to the network, of course. And you've been working on an on-premise setting, right? So you work for this fictitious company here. This company has 3 sites. One is San Diego, one is in Los Angeles, and one in San Francisco. So here in California, so they have 3 sites. They're all connected through WAN connections. They call like Comcast or Xfinity or some other ISP provider. They have their own wide area network. Everything is private. All the IPs are private. So everything is really isolated for the company, which is great. I've been, like I said, I've been working with computers for a long time. And I remember when I was used to live down there in Florida, and I had this customer. They have an office in Fort Lauderdale, an office in Fort Myers, and an office in Naples. And I had to go from office to office to go set up stuff in there, make sure the connections are okay when something goes down. So this is traditional, right? This is how we used to, how most companies are still working today. And even when they migrated to the cloud, some of them are still keeping their own private network. And when they do their own private network, what do they have in each one of these sites? Well, in order to have a private network, you need to have like a switch, right? You would go and order switch through your retailer, your reseller. So you buy a switch from some brands, you stack up those switches, you get all the cables in. You put the switches on a rack, you mount them on a rack, right? You may have your service by those racks. So everything is physical and connected, and you can see the cables. And to be honest, I kind of miss this, because since I have started working with the cloud about 7 years ago, more intensively with the cloud, I'm not dealing with these things anymore. I don't see cables anymore. I don't see those switches anymore. I know they are there, but companies are hiring me to help them migrate their workload to the cloud. So I kind of not seeing that anymore. But I remember those times, right? I've been there. And that's the idea, right? If you want to create, if I need to have another site here, add a new one, like in Sacramento, for instance, here in California, I would go there and put the switch in there, put the connection, all the drill we just went through, right? All of that. But then this thing called the cloud showed up. And the thing about the cloud is companies want to go to the cloud because they have learned that when you run services, usually they run better and more cost effectively when you run them in the cloud. Why is that? Because the cloud is like when you live in community, right? If you want to keep a castle for yourself, living by yourself in a big castle will cost you a lot. But if you live in a village and you share benefits with the community, usually everyone giving their own share, pay for their own share, everybody benefits from the strength of the community, right? And that's the idea of the cloud. The cloud is of course, is a multi-tenant cloud provider like Microsoft Azure. And we have a lot of services there from Azure that Microsoft develops, and they make available in there. So my company, my fictitious company here, they have been working on premise all the time. They have SQL databases going on in there. They have file shares going on in there. They have all of these things going on locally, but they want to start moving to the clouds for all of these benefits I have already mentioned, but they have a concern. And the concern is obvious, right? My data is private here. This thing is public. When I move my data to the cloud, will my data be exposed to the public internet? And the answer for that question, like any other question you ask from a DBA, it depends. But by default, when you put this specifically the data services up in Azure, they depending on the service, they may or may not be public facing the internet, the public internet. They may or may not be. like this one here. And one of the, if you're not that familiar with the cloud yet, specifically Azure, in Azure, you usually document most of the things using the Azure icons. You know, the best practice to put the names under those icons. But you know, if you want to read diagrams, the documentations from Azure, you get a better get familiar with the icons. So like this one here in the middle is the storage account to store files. It's not a replacer for or a replacement for OneDrive. OneDrive is for end users. Storage accounts, they are usually for files for applications, supporting applications like a website that needs to store files somewhere. You would store those files in the storage account. Or data lake, right? If you're doing data engineering, you have all those structure or semi-structure or unstructured data, and you need a place to put that data. You put it those data in a storage account, or you may have a SQL server. So the storage account would by default be facing the public internet. SQL Server by default is not connected, right? They changed the deployment model. It used to be public by default, but now they changed. You have to tell when you deploy SQL Server. We're gonna show that in the demo. And there is this new guy here. What is it here? There is this new guy here, the Microsoft Fabric, which is, I'm sorry, which is the new Microsoft service for analytics, right? For everything analytics you want to do, instead of having multiple services out there doing data analytics, you can have only one platform collecting all the data there. That is the Microsoft Fabric, right? This one here, Microsoft Fabric. So my company traditionally have been working on premise, but now they want you connecting here, and they want to make sure that all the data that's in there, at least at the beginning, it's still private. Like I need a new SQL server to support an internal application, but I don't want that SQL server to be on premise because I have to buy a server, I have to buy a licenses and all of that. I want that SQL server to be here. I want that SQL server to be in the cloud over here. Yeah, at the same time, I want that SQL Server to be visible or accessible only to my local network. How do I do that? Oh, you came to the right place. I came here exactly to show you how to do that. In terms of design, it goes like this. Let me get here to the side. In terms of design, it works like this. Uh, every service up in the cloud will have that public IP address. But if you want that service to be connected to your private networking, like exactly like you would do on a physical environment, on a real world environment, like you have an office and then you have to buy a switch to start creating a local network in that office. Up in the cloud, up in Azure, if you want to start creating your own private network that will be just for you, like buy a switch, put in there in the cloud just for you, what you do is you get a service in the cloud that will resemble your own private network. And that service is the VNet. So this icon here with the three dots, it's called the VNet, not VPN, not VPN. It's the VNet. And VNet, of course, stands for virtual network, right? Or virtual networking, virtual network. So inside the VNet, the IP address in here is the private IP address, 10.0, 10 dot something, or 172.196, or 192.168, whatever, right? So IP addresses, they are not routable in the public internet. They're for private usage. So what you do, the first thing you do is creating a virtual network. The second thing you do is, once you have your virtual network, you're gonna tell the services you want that are storing your data that you want to work only or with that data only in a private setting. It's like if you have, imagine that you have a cable. This server, let's say this SQL server. This SQL server is connected to the public internet. I'm going to unplug that cable from the public internet and plug that cable to my internal switch or my private networking or VNet, right? The name of the service. The connection in between a service to a private network is known as a private endpoint. So what is a private endpoint? Private endpoint is the connecting of the cable into your private network address. Now, if you look at this line here, for instance, and my camera is not working well yet, I have to fix that later. My fingers are disappearing. So let me use the mouse here. Let's see if the mouse goes better. Where is the mouse? Mouse is there. Whoops. Don't break anything, Armando. Let's see. There we go. All right, here's my mouse. So if you follow this line here, you see that, of course, like any other line, there are two ends in this line. There is one end connecting here to the private IP address, and there is another end connecting to the service. So this end here that connects to the private IP address, right, the one down here, is called the private endpoint. And the other end of the service is the private service, right? Is the other end of that cable, which means just this: if there is a service in Azure and I want to connect that service to a private setting, private network setting, I need to double check if that service supports that. So if the service support that, the documentation will tell you that the service has a private link. That's the name, private link. Private link means that a service can be connected to a VNet. So if the service has a private link, you can set up a private endpoint to your VNet. Some people get a bit confused because there's private link, private endpoint. What's this thing? Imagine a coin is the two sides of the same coin, right? One side, the other side. If it's a cable, it's one end of the cable, the other end of the cable. For us, what we really set up is the private endpoints because the private link is or is not supported by the service. Okay.